And under the prior administration, I thought that both the Secretary of the Treasury and the President, quite frankly, were less than able to really spell out what some of the problems were, and I recognize that as shortcomings of the administration. But since that time, the new administration has taken office, and the other night at dinner, I listened intently to the President describe what his actions would be and what he wanted to do, and then I realized why so many of my constituents and so much of the news media, regardless whether it's specialized in financial affairs or the general news media, seems to be talking about questions that aren't sufficiently clear as to what the problem is. And I realized last night when we were briefed by Treasury as to what the Secretary of Treasury statements would be today, that it was represented by one of the staffers that sat in the back of the room, that after the briefing was concluded and was open for question and answers, his question was a very pertinent question. What's the plan and what's the problem? And I think he succinctly put it, and maybe I would like to reiterate what he said. I think all of you, sir, from the Federal Reserve to the Secretary of Treasury past, to the President, Secretary of Treasury, to our two presidents, the present president and the past president, have failed for all of us, particularly the general public, to enunciate what the problem is. And it's very clear when we listen to the debates of the various parties and the interest groups that they're talking past each other, not to the problem. And what I'm really raising the question is, what can we do? What can you do? What can the key players do to take the time to define in as simple terms as possible what is the problem, what are the potential end results of the problem if not handled in a correct way or are incapable of being handled, and where our glide path is going. I'm just really tired of listening to you and others say, well, when we evolved this solution 4 weeks ago, the economy has materially changed since then, and that's no longer operative. That's of little consequence or value to me as a policymaker or as a legislator to know that all the work we put in for the last 4 weeks is useless because the circumstances have changed. Surely, in describing the problem, I think the President described pretty simply the other night, he said we're in an accelerating whirlpool. That makes sense to me. I understand what that means. Why can't we simply say what that means if you take today's circumstances and you extrapolate 4 weeks from now, 8 weeks from now? But more than that, you know, there was a question last night at the President's news conference. One of the reporters asked, are there going to be a requirement for additional funds? And I was a little disappointed in our President because I think he is a straight, upfront guy. He sidestepped the question. And the reality, unless I'm terribly mistaken, maybe I want to pose that question for you to answer, I see no question that more funds will be necessary on the side of stabilizing the financial institutions of this country. The $700 billion or the $350 billion we're working on right now are not going to be sufficient enough to resolve this problem. And there is an attempt, as I sense it, of Treasury and the Federal Reserve to find other conduits for funds to be used or guarantees to be put in place that really do represent commitments and funds of the United States, but don't have to be passed by Congress or openly declared. And as a result, every time that's heard, I think we lose the support of the American people in understanding how serious this problem is and what the end result could be if we don't get precipitous action, either today on the recovery bill in the Senate or our next bailout bills, TRAP, the TARP 2, or what you may call it, or going down the road as to what may happen. Now, what can we do to facilitate identifying and describing the problem?